Hi, my name is Rachel and welcome to the Art Crew. Today I'm going to be teaching you how to create those smooth, buttery transitions that everybody looks for when working with acrylic paints using a method called the wet on wet method. So let's get started. First off, we need to talk about the method itself. Now, the wet on wet method just means that we're working wet paint into wet paint or working on a wet surface. Uncompared to other paints, acrylic paints dry relatively quickly, so we end up doing a lot of color mixing and blending on the canvas itself instead of on the palette, which is why the wet on wet method gives us the smoothest transitions and the most beautiful color blending. So let me show you how to get started. All right, so for this, I'm going to do two demos. The first one, I'm going to show you the technique using a gradient, meaning I'm going to start from a light color and work my way to a dark color. In this case, I'm going to be using white and blue. And then once I'm done explaining the technique, I'm going to show you what that looks like in practice. For this, you are going to need everything you see here: paper towels, water, some paintbrushes, any kind of canvas, and I'm just using a paper plate as my palette. And I just wanted to remind everyone that it's very easy to pick the wrong brush size. When you're blending, you want to make sure you're starting with a large brush so you can cover the area quickly. So we're going to set this brush off to the side. Now, when we are doing any kind of work with acrylic paints, as a friendly reminder, you always want to start with damp bristles, not wet bristles. So I'm going to go ahead and get those wet in my cup. I'm going to wipe off all that excess water and even tap it off on my paper towel. Damp is good. And if you want to see more tips and tricks on acrylic paints, especially some of the mistakes I see, you can check out my other video on the 3 biggest mistakes I see. So that way, if there's any confusion, you can get some help there. Now for this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start light and I'm going to work my way to dark. And for this, I'm going to demonstrate it by showing you it in a light value, a middle value, and a dark value. So I'm going to start off by creating just a white section on my canvas. I'm not going to fill the whole canvas in just because I'm working relatively quickly to show you guys what's up. And I'm going to spread this evenly across my canvas in kind of a big chunk. Now I'm going to make a middle value. You can go as dark or as light as you want on this. And I'm going to do all of my mixing on my palette relatively quickly. I'm not going to use a palette knife. I'm just going to scoop up a tiny bit of blue and I'm going to make myself kind of a middle, medium, sky value blue. You can go as dark, like I said, as you want. And I'm just going to brush a section here, giving myself another chunk of color. And you could start blending now, but I'm going to show you guys how I blend it all together. So your call. And then lastly, I'm going to put down some straight blue at the bottom. And I let my brush remain kind of, it's got some white still on it, so it's going to be a little bit lighter than my darkest blue. And those are going to be my 3 sections. This is the only time you're actually going to want to wash off your paintbrush. For the rest of this, we're going to be working with what I call a dirty brush, which just means that you are going to be wiping it on a paper towel instead of cleaning it off in water. And now that I have a decently clean brush, I'm going to start back into my light color. And I'm going to start, I like to think of this as 50% of my brush in my white and 50% of my brush in my light blue. And with very gentle, we want very light pressure, I'm going to start working the two together, just brushing back and forth. And you're going to see that the transition's already going to start to blur. Now, if I want my light color to get darker, I'm going to bring that transition up into the white, which this is the first layer, so it's not going to get too dark too quickly. And I'm also going to work my way back down. It's kind of working back and forth. If it gets too dark, I can add more light. If it gets too light, I can add more dark, and so on and so forth. Friendly reminder, acrylic paints don't typically look good until you have at least 2 layers. For this, I will do 2 so you can see it. But that is going to be my first transition. And then I'm going to keep working my way down, or you can start right where your dark blue and light blue touch. And again, 50% of my paintbrush on my canvas, or on the dark blue, and 50% on the light blue. And I'm going to brush the two together. And again, you're going to see that it's going to start to blur out on the bottom. this is what we're going for. And I'm going to brush it down, and I'm going to actually work my way back up into my light blue. This is going to give me a little bit of a less stark transition. I want it to be fairly light, and I might work all the way back up into my white and back down. So this is why, again, you want to work relatively quickly, because you do want the paint to be still wet while you're doing this. So that's why I recommend using a bigger brush. Now the painting is 80% dry here, and I'm going to start putting on my second layer of paint, starting with my white and then working with my light blue and blending those two together, and then I'll work my way down to my darker blue. And you'll notice this time I'm just wiping my paintbrush off on my paper towel instead of rinsing it in my cup, and this just gives me a bit more control and helps me blend more smoothly. If the paint starts to get tacky, I will pick up some extra paint on my palette to help create smoother transitions. And that is how I do my kind of gradient practice. So you can see that I had wet paint and I worked it into my wet paint. And then even with it not fully dry, I continued to work over the top of it. So that's the basics of the wet on wet method. But the question always is, what does this look like in practice? So now I'm going to do a little demo showing you guys what this looks like when we're actually working with objects or other areas other than just a straight area of color. For this activity, I'm going to be doing the classic sphere exercise, which I have directions for listed in my free acrylic painting guidebook that has what materials I use, as well as some of my other tips and tricks. Feel free to download that and check it out so that you don't have to keep rewinding this video. What it starts with is me sketching out my sphere in paint, and then I'm going to roughly paint in a background, not being too particular about it. I'm switching to a medium size brush, and I'm going to start by putting in my highlights just like we did before with the gradient, but this time I'm following the circular curvature of the sphere, and I'm going to get just a tiny bit darker as I work my way down. And this is going to be my first coat. I am going to do this in multiple, so I'm not being too particular in making sure it's smooth right away. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start filling in my sphere. I've done my medium value-ish right here. And then I'm going to work all the way to the bottom of my sphere, making sure that I'm getting darker as I work my way down. And then just like before, I am going to wipe my brush off on my paper towel, and I'm going to slowly start to blend out my transitions. This takes time. In total, this exercise took me about 25 to 30 minutes to complete. So I've sped it up, so obviously you don't have to watch the whole thing, but that just gives you some guidance on how long it can take. I've also done many spheres, so it may take you longer to complete this activity. And remember, it is just paint. So if you make a mistake, let it dry fully and then you can paint over it. Now that I have my sphere roughly blended out, I'm actually switching to a smaller brush now so that I can do the cast shadow. The cast shadow is just the shadow from the shape itself when the light hits it. And it reflects down onto whatever it's resting on. And for this, I think if you can notice, I went ahead and I started dark to light, and you'll see that I'm fighting a little bit getting the gray to lighten up some. I wanted to show you that you can do it both ways. There's no wrong answer. There's just an easier way and a harder way, but both of them will get you very similar results. For my cast shadow, I'm also only going to do one coat of paint, so you will see me tweak it a little bit more than when I work with my sphere. This is just because I want it to match my background, and I only did one coat of paint with my background, so I'm going to leave it kind of brush strokey, but still blended. Once I feel like I have that fully settled, I'm going to go ahead and start back in my sphere, which is now 80 to 100% dry. I felt like my sphere was a little dark, so I'm going to go ahead and start lightening it up. Like I said, this is where we get an opportunity to play and push and pull, because it is just paint and we can just paint over it. So I'm starting off relatively slow, making sure I'm getting that upper edge fully covered. And I'm just taking my time and blending as I go a little bit more. And this is because my paints have already started to dry on my palette, which is what you will find happens pretty regularly. And it means I'm going to have to pick up some more paint as I work. And I'm going to want to blend my sections a little bit faster. So I'm not going to go as far down as quickly because I'm going to want to blend those transitions sooner. And I'm going to keep working in those sections all the way down my surface. Now I'm going to paint this big chunk of gray right here, and that's just because I am going to do a little bit of color mixing. This is really just a value shift. On my sphere itself, I'm going to take a dark swoop of paint and I'm going to re-add my shadow back in over the top of the wet paint I just put down, and then I'm going to blend it out. So this is where I talk about doing a lot more of the blending on your canvas rather than on your palette specifically. And now I'm going to start working back into the areas that I need to. You can see I made a little mistake. Remember, it's just paint. So I'm going to paint right over it, and I'm going to keep blending, and you'll notice I'm going to start cleaning my brush more and more as I go down. And my paper towel is going to get pretty dirty, so always remember to try and find a clean spot. I do make a lot of mistakes where I will grab from my paper towel and then suddenly I'll have a dark streak. That happens, and then you can just keep working over it. And that's what I'm going to do to work my way all the way down the sphere. So from here, I'm just going to keep finessing it, and as much as it is fun for me to talk at you guys over and over again, I'm going to go ahead and speed up this video and get us all the way to the end of this exercise, and then we will wrap all of this up. So now you know how to blend like a pro using the wet on wet method. And as always, if you have any questions that come up, feel free to leave them in the comment section below and I'll try to get back to them as quickly as possible. Stay tuned for some more blending videos coming out here very shortly using the dry brushing technique and the wet on dry technique. So stay tuned for that. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Happy painting, have a good practice, and I'll see you next time.